Hey guys, tonight we're starting somewhere dark. June 8th, 1492. Windsor Castle, 11 o'clock at night. A wooden coffin is being carried by boat down the Thames in complete darkness. No ceremony, no mourners, no announcement. Inside that coffin, the body of Elizabeth Woodville, former Queen of England, mother of 2 murdered princes, the woman they called a witch. The burial is happening at night because someone decided it had to. Someone powerful enough to override tradition. Someone scared enough to want this done in secret, quickly, quietly, before anyone could ask why a queen was being buried like a criminal. When the herald records the funeral, his hand is shaking. You can see it in the handwriting. He writes it down carefully because he wants someone, anyone, to know how wrong this is, how shameful, how deliberately humiliating. Only a dozen old men show up. That's it. 12 men holding torches, except they're not even proper torches. Not the kind you use for royal ceremonies. Not even the kind you use for minor nobles. These are torch ends, stubs, the leftover bits, the garbage you'd use to light your way to the stables at night. That's what they gave the Queen of England. The hearse carrying her coffin, such as they use for the common people. 4 wooden candlesticks, nothing royal, nothing that says this woman once wore a crown, once ruled England, once had enough power to make kings nervous. This is how Elizabeth Woodville's story ends, buried at midnight, like she was nobody. But here's what they don't tell you. That midnight funeral didn't erase her, because 530 years later, we're still talking about her. Still asking why they were so scared, still digging up secrets they tried to bury in the dark. Before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing who's joining us from around the world. Now settle in, get comfortable. This is going to take a while. Because Elizabeth's story isn't simple. It's not a fairy tale. It's the story of a woman called a witch for being good at politics, who lost everything twice and started over both times, who was buried at midnight and still refused to disappear. And to understand Elizabeth, you need to understand her mother first. Because Jacquetta of Luxembourg was accused of witchcraft before Elizabeth ever touched a crown. And those accusations, that trial, that lead figurine they held up in court as proof she'd bewitched a king, all of that set the stage for everything that came after. 1433. Jacquetta of Luxembourg is 20 years old, beautiful, wealthy, born into one of the most powerful families in Europe, the House of Luxembourg, real continental nobility, and she's just been married off to John, Duke of Bedford, brother of King Henry V of England, one of the most powerful men in Europe. Sounds great, right? There's one problem. The Duke is 43 years old, 26 years older than she is, and he'd been widowed just 5 months earlier. His first wife, Anne of Burgundy, had barely been cold in the ground when he married Jacquetta. 5 months, that's it. This deeply offended Anne's brother, Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy. And that offence contributed to the collapse of the crucial Anglo-Burgundian alliance that had kept England strong in France, all because the Duke couldn't wait a respectable mourning period before remarrying. But here's where it gets interesting. When Jacquetta arrived in Paris as the new Duchess of Bedford, she discovered something in her husband's house. The Hôtel de Bourbon, massive, luxurious, and somewhere inside, the Duke kept a private laboratory. Alchemy equipment, books on the occult, treatises on magic and transformation. The Duke of Bedford was apparently very interested in things the church considered dangerous. Jacquetta is 17 years old, curious, intelligent, and now married to a man who has secret rooms filled with forbidden knowledge. Did she read those books? Did she learn things she shouldn't have known? We'll never know for certain, but years later, when she's accused of witchcraft, her accusers will remember, will whisper about the alchemy lab, about the occult library, about what she might have learned in Paris while her old husband was busy running the English war effort in France. The Duke dies in 1435. 2 years of marriage. Jacquetta is 22 years old, widowed, wealthy, one of the most eligible women in Europe. She could marry any duke or prince or lord. Kings would consider her. She marries her husband's knight, Richard Woodville. Nobody. A mere knight. Handsome, yes. Charming, absolutely. But politically, he's nothing. His father had been a chamberlain, a servant in noble households. Richard himself is just a soldier. Good with a sword. That's it. No title beyond knight. No vast estates. No army. Just a smile that apparently made Jacquetta forget about duty and alliances and everything a duchess is supposed to care about. They marry in secret, 1436 or 1437. Exact date unknown, because they're hiding it. No permission, no announcement, just a quiet ceremony somewhere. And when Henry VI, King of England, finds out, he loses his mind. Fines them £1,000. £1,000, that's a fortune. That's the kind of money that could buy a small army. That's a very clear message that you don't marry above your station without asking first. Jacquetta has to sell manors in the West Country to raise the cash. Parcels of land her first husband had given her, sold off to Cardinal Beaufort just to pay the fine for marrying the man she actually wanted. Parliament gets involved, strips Jacquetta of some of her wealth, makes an example of her. How dare a woman of her status lower herself? What kind of spell did this knight cast over her? See the pattern forming? Powerful woman makes unconventional choice. Marries someone beneath her. Must be magic, must be sorcery. Because women don't make their own decisions. Not real decisions, not important ones. The pardon is finally granted on October 24th, 1437, and some historians think they know why. Because Jacquetta is pregnant, heavily pregnant, and that baby, that scandalous child born of a secret marriage between a duchess and a nobody knight, is Elizabeth Woodville, the future queen, the future witch. But Jacquetta doesn't care about the whispers. She's chosen her path, she's paid her fine, she's got her knight and her baby, and she's moving forward. And that choice, that refusal to play by the rules, teaches her daughters something crucial, something that will shape everything that comes after. You don't wait for men to give you power. You take it. And when they question how you got it, you smile and keep moving. Jacquetta and Richard have 14 children. 14. Most survive, which is remarkable for the medieval period. Childhood mortality was brutal. Disease, accidents, simple fevers that killed before anyone could do anything. But the Woodvilles are lucky. Or maybe just stubborn. Most of their children make it to adulthood. And Elizabeth, the third child, grows up watching her mother. Watching Jacquetta navigate a world that resents her marriage, that whispers about how she trapped Richard, that calls her ambitious, grasping, unnatural. Elizabeth learns to read a room, to listen for what men aren't saying, to charm without seeming manipulative, to negotiate without appearing demanding, to survive in a world that wants women silent and powerless. Because survival in the 1500s, especially for women, requires more than obedience. It requires cunning. And here's something nobody talks about, something that will matter later, when the accusations start flying. Jacquetta's ancestry. She descended from the House of Luxembourg, a family rumoured to have ties to Melusine. You know Melusine, legendary water spirit from medieval folklore. Half woman, half serpent. The story goes like this. Melusine marries a mortal man. Beautiful woman, perfect wife. Except she makes him promise one thing. Never look at her on Saturdays. Never enter her bathing chamber. Never break that rule. For years he keeps that promise. They have children, build a life, everything is perfect, but curiosity is dangerous. One Saturday he follows her. Can't help himself, has to know what she's hiding. He peers through the keyhole of her bathing chamber, and he sees her true form. Woman's torso, serpent's tail coiled beneath the water, scales glinting wet. Not quite human, not quite monster, something in between. She looks up. Their eyes meet through the keyhole, and she knows he's broken the promise, knows trust is shattered. She screams, a sound that's not quite human, and she vanishes, transformed, gone, forever cursed, forever between worlds, forever punished for being something other than what she appeared. It's just a myth, a fairy tale, the kind of story bored nobles tell each other at feasts. But in medieval Europe, myths become accusations faster than you can blink, and Jacquetta's enemies love this connection. They whisper that she carries Melusine's blood, that she possesses unnatural powers, that she's used magic to secure her second marriage, and later they'll say she used that same magic to bewitch a king into marrying her daughter. For years, Jacquetta ignores the rumours. She has wealth, status, the protection of being Richard Woodville's wife. Let them talk. She has more important things to do, like raising 14 children, like making sure her daughters learn how to survive in a world that wants them powerless. But in 1469, the whispers become accusations, and accusations become a trial. Because Thomas Wake, a follower of the Earl of Warwick, brings formal charges, claims that Jacquetta of Luxembourg practiced witchcraft. His evidence? A lead figurine. That's it. A small lead figure, crudely made, found in the home of a man who may or may not have known Jacquetta. Wake claims this figurine was made by Jacquetta herself, that she used it to force King Edward IV to marry Elizabeth against his nature, that she twisted his mind with dark magic, corrupted his judgment, made him betray his kingdom for lust. The accusation is absurd. But in 1469, absurd doesn't matter. Witchcraft accusations don't require proof, they require belief. And plenty of people want to believe, because if Elizabeth wasn't queen by right or charm, if she was queen because of sorcery, then her marriage could be undone. Her children could be declared illegitimate. Her family could be destroyed. Jacquetta is summoned to court. Picture this moment. You're in your 50s, you've survived war, scandal, remarriage. You're a duchess, a mother of 14 children, a grandmother. You've navigated 3 decades of medieval politics without making a fatal mistake. And now you're being dragged into a courtroom, accused of something that carries the death penalty. Not just death, public execution, burning at the stake, your body left to smoulder as a warning to other women, your family name destroyed, your children's futures obliterated, everything you built turned to ash because one man decided to call you a witch. The lead figurine is presented, small enough to fit in your palm, crude, broken in the middle and held together with wire. This is the evidence. This is what's supposed to prove you perverted a king's mind through dark magic. The court watches, waits. Nobles lean forward in their seats. This is entertainment as much as justice. A powerful woman about to be brought low. Finally, the air in the courtroom smells like sweat and wool and anticipation. That particular stink of dozens of unwashed bodies packed into a space with bad ventilation. The kind of smell that makes you want to gag, but you can't, because showing weakness means admitting guilt. You stand there, breathe through your mouth, keep your face neutral, and prepare to fight for your life using nothing but words. And here's where the story gets interesting. Because Jacquetta doesn't beg, doesn't cry, doesn't plead innocence in a shaking voice. She walks into that courtroom and systematically demolishes the accusation. She points out that the figurine wasn't found in her possession, that no witness saw her make it, that the entire accusation rests on the word of one man, Thomas Wake, a man loyal to Warwick, a man who stands to gain if she's convicted. She demands to know why, if she had such powerful magic, she'd waste it on something as trivial as a marriage, when she could have bewitched the entire kingdom. Why stop at one king? Why not control them all? If she's so powerful, why hasn't she used her magic to destroy her enemies, to make herself even wealthier, to ensure her husband gets titles and honours beyond what he has. It's brilliant, calm, logical, unbothered. The kind of defence that makes accusers look stupid. And it works. The court clears her. Officially, she's innocent. The figurine is dismissed as meaningless. The accusations are dropped. Jacquetta walks out of that courtroom free, but the damage is done. People remember the accusation, forget the acquittal, the whispers continue. For the rest of her life, Jacquetta will be that woman who was accused of witchcraft. Not that woman who was cleared, not that innocent woman, just accused, and the template is set. If you want to destroy a powerful woman, you don't need evidence, you just need the word witch. But here's what nobody realises at the time, what nobody could have predicted. That lead figurine, that ridiculous piece of evidence that should have been laughed out of court, is creating a blueprint. A playbook that will be used against powerful women for the next 300 years. Joan of Arc, burned at 19, accused of witchcraft alongside heresy because she led armies and wore men's clothing and claimed God spoke to her. Anne Boleyn, beheaded in 1536, accused of adultery, treason and witchcraft. The evidence? She had 6 fingers on one hand, supposedly a devil's mark. She'd bewitched King Henry VIII into breaking with Rome. Thousands of unnamed women across Europe, accused, tortured, drowned, burned, all using the same basic script that started with Jacquetta of Luxembourg standing in a courtroom defending herself against a broken toy. The accusers don't know they're setting a precedent, they just know it works. Call a woman a witch and suddenly you don't need real evidence, don't need witnesses, don't need logic, you just need fear. And fear in medieval Europe is the most powerful weapon of all. Now let's talk about Jacquetta's daughter, Elizabeth, born into this world of whispers and accusations, watching her mother survive, learning. Elizabeth marries young, 1454 or 1455. The exact date is debated, but somewhere in that range, to Sir John Grey of Groby. It's a decent match. John's family has land in Leicestershire, has some status, not spectacular, but solid, respectable. The kind of marriage a knight's daughter could hope for, even if her mother was a duchess. Elizabeth was probably fostered with Sir Edward Grey and his wife, Elizabeth, in Leicestershire. That's how it worked for noble children. Around age 7, you were sent to live with other noble families. Not abandonment, education. You learned how to behave in different households, how to navigate different family dynamics, how to make connections that would matter later. And there, Elizabeth met their son. John Grey, young, reasonably handsome, heir to considerable lands. They married, had 2 sons, Thomas, born around 1455, Richard, born maybe 1458. Elizabeth settled into the life of a minor noblewoman, managing an estate, raising children, doing needlework by firelight. Not glamorous, but comfortable, safe. And then the Wars of the Roses exploded. Lancaster versus York, Red Rose versus White Rose, cousin murdering cousin over who had the better claim to the English throne. The kind of civil war that tears countries apart. That makes neighbours into enemies. That forces everyone to pick a side and pray they pick the right one. John Grey picked the wrong side. He fought for the Lancastrians, for Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou, and on February 17th, 1461, at the Second Battle of St Albans, he was killed. Cut down in the fighting, maybe by sword, maybe by arrow, maybe by poleaxy. Medieval battles didn't keep detailed casualty reports, just lists of important dead. Elizabeth was probably 23 years old, a widow with 2 small sons, and her problems were just beginning. Because when Edward IV, the Yorkist claimant, seized the throne in 1461, he attainted the Lancastrian nobles, declared them traitors, seized their lands, and John Grey's estates, the lands that were supposed to provide for Elizabeth and her sons, were taken, confiscated, given to loyal Yorkists as rewards for their service. Elizabeth was left with almost nothing. The lands that were supposed to be her son's inheritance, gone. Her jointure, the property set aside to support her as a widow, also seized. She was financially ruined through no fault of her own. Her husband had chosen loyalty to Henry VI, and now his widow and sons were paying the price. In April of 1464, Elizabeth was desperate enough to sign a legal document, an agreement with Lord Hastings, one of Edward IV's closest friends and most powerful nobles. The deal? She'd marry her son Thomas, her heir, to one of Hastings' daughters or nieces, to a girl who hadn't even been born yet. That's how desperate she was. She was promising her child in marriage to someone who didn't exist, just hoping it might help. Hoping Hastings would use his influence with the king to get her lands back, or at least ensure her sons had some kind of future. That document is dated April 13th, 1464, just 18 days before May 1st. 18 days before Elizabeth's alleged secret wedding to the king. Think about that. 18 days before supposedly marrying Edward, Elizabeth is still scrambling, still making desperate deals, still trying to secure her sons' futures through the only means available to a powerless widow. Does that sound like a woman about to marry the king in secret? Or does it sound like a woman who has no idea her life is about to change? Some historians think this proves the May 1st date is romantic mythology, that maybe the wedding happened later, or that maybe it happened on May 1st but the courtship had been going on longer than the stories suggest, that Elizabeth had been working on Edward for a while, being strategic, playing a longer game before he finally agreed to marry her. We'll never know for certain, but here's what we do know. On May 1st, 1464, somewhere in or near the manor house at Grafton Regis, Elizabeth Woodville married Edward IV, King of England, in secret, with only 6 witnesses, her mother Jacquetta, 2 unnamed gentlemen, a priest, and a boy who served at Mass. That's it. That's the entire wedding party for a king's marriage. No nobles, no ceremony, no announcement, just a secret exchange of vows in a small chapel. The story everyone knows is romantic. Elizabeth standing under an oak tree at Grafton Regis with her 2 young sons clutching her skirts, waiting to petition the king for help with her lands. She's beautiful. He's captivated, instantly smitten. He offers to help her if she'll become his mistress. She refuses, says she's not that kind of woman, that she's not worthy to be a queen, but too good to be a mistress. And Edward, who has never been refused anything in his life, who has women throwing themselves at him constantly because he's young and handsome and king, becomes obsessed. If he wants her, he'll have to marry her. So he does. That's the story. The fairy tale. The romance that gets told and retold. But the April 13th document complicates that narrative. Suggests maybe it wasn't quite so simple. Maybe it wasn't love at first sight. Maybe Elizabeth was playing a longer, more strategic game, using every tool available to a desperate widow. Beauty, yes, but also intelligence, careful manipulation, understanding what men want and how to make them think it was their idea. Whatever actually happened, the result is the same. They marry, and for 5 months Edward keeps it secret. 5 months, while Warwick is in France negotiating Edward's marriage to Bona of Savoy, sister-in-law to the King of France. While the council is making plans, while everyone assumes the king is single, he's already married to a widow, a Lancastrian widow, a nobody with no political value whatsoever. Edward returns to Stony Stratford after the wedding, where he's staying with his attendants, pretends he's been hunting, goes to bed as if exhausted from a day in the forest. Then a few days later, he returns to Grafton Regis, and Elizabeth is brought to him secretly at night, hidden, concealed, smuggled into his room, so that almost no one but her mother knows. For nearly 5 months, the King of England is married, and nobody except a handful of people knows it. Edward carries on as if he's still single, goes to council meetings where nobles discuss marrying him off to foreign princesses. listens to Warwick negotiate that French marriage. Warwick, his chief advisor. The man who put him on the throne, the man who expects loyalty, expects to be consulted, expects to shape Edward's reign. And Edward says nothing, just sits there, listening to plans for a wedding that can never happen because he's already married. Finally, on Michaelmas Day, September 29th, 1464, at the Great Council at Reading Abbey, when the nobles are really pressing him to accept the French match, Edward makes his announcement. He stands up and calmly says, "I'm already married to Dame Elizabeth Grey." The room explodes. The council tells him, with what the chronicler describes as great frankness, that he must know that she was no wife for a prince such as himself. Translation: you married beneath yourself. You threw away a strategic alliance for a widow with 2 kids and no dowry. What were you thinking? But it's too late. The marriage is done. Consummated, legal, binding. There's nothing they can do about it except rage. And rage they do. And the Earl of Warwick, who had just returned from France where he'd been actively negotiating Edward's marriage to Bona of Savoy, who had told the French king that England's king would marry his sister-in-law, who had staked his political reputation on this alliance, is humiliated, destroyed, made to look like a fool in front of the entire French court. The chronicler notes, they never loved each other after. That's medieval understatement. That's like saying, World War I was a bit of a disagreement. Warwick's humiliation will fester, will grow, will poison, will eventually explode into rebellion, civil war, the death of thousands, and ultimately Warwick's death on a battlefield. All because Edward married a widow in secret and let Warwick make promises that could never be kept. But the answer, according to Edward's enemies, is obvious. He wasn't thinking. He was bewitched. Elizabeth and her mother had used sorcery, love potions, dark magic. That's the only explanation that makes sense. Because kings don't marry for love. They marry for alliances, for land, for power. Edward just destroyed a French alliance for a woman. Must be magic, but in September of 1464, none of that has happened yet. Right now, Elizabeth Woodville is queen, officially announced, accepted, and she's about to discover that being queen doesn't mean being safe, it means being a target. Elizabeth's coronation takes place on May 26, 1465, about a year after the secret wedding, and it's spectacular. Edward might have married her in secret, might have shocked his nobles, but he's going to make damn sure everyone treats her like a proper queen. She wears purple robes, not blue, though later propaganda will depict her in Yorkist blue to make her seem more virginal, more pure, but contemporary accounts say purple, royal purple, the colour of emperors and kings, the colour that says, I'm not just decorative, I'm powerful. She holds both the sceptre of the realm and the sceptre of St. Edward. 2 symbols of power, 2 declarations that she's not just queen consort, decorative and powerless. She's Queen of England. Her sister Catherine and her brother-in-law Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, walk in the procession. Well, walk is generous. They're carried on the shoulders of unnamed persons because they're so young. Catherine is probably 11. Buckingham is 11. Both children, married to each other in one of those political matches where nobody asks what the children want. That same Buckingham will, 18 years later, betray Elizabeth's son. Will help Richard III seize power. Will participate in the destruction of Elizabeth's family. But right now, he's just a child being carried through London, on someone's shoulders, part of the spectacle. The bishops of Durham and Salisbury lead Elizabeth to the altar. The Dowager Duchess of Buckingham holds her train. Everything is done properly, ceremonially, with all the dignity and respect due to a queen. After the ceremony comes the banquet, and after the banquet a tournament in her honour. Knights jousting, showing off their skills, competing for glory and the Queen's favour. The winner is awarded a ruby ring from Elizabeth's own hand. But here's what's interesting. the descriptions of Elizabeth herself from people who saw her, who watched her being crowned, who observed her up close. She was beautiful. Everyone agrees on that. But it wasn't a soft, gentle beauty. It wasn't the kind that made men feel comfortable. It was something stranger, more intense, more unsettling. The Burgundian chronicler Jean de Warren called her La plus belle fille d'Angleterre, the most beautiful woman in England. He specifically noted that Edward chose her because of sa très grande beauté, her very great beauty. Edward Hall's chronicle describes her fair hair, golden, streaming down her back almost to her feet at her presentation to court. That's significant. In medieval England, unmarried women wore their hair loose. Married women covered their hair. But for ceremonial occasions, queens could display their hair as a symbol of their unique status. And Elizabeth's hair was golden, long, striking, the kind of hair people write poetry about. But it's another description that's really interesting. Her eyes, described as heavy-lidded, like those of a dragon. Now that's not an insult. Dragons in medieval iconography represent power, mystery, danger, something not quite human, something otherworldly. Saying someone has dragon eyes isn't calling them ugly, it's calling them unsettling, powerful, not safe. Elizabeth Woodville didn't look like a gentle maiden. She looked like someone who could ruin you. And maybe that's exactly why Edward married her. Not just because she was beautiful, but because she was dangerous, because she didn't play safe. Because when he offered to make her his mistress, she looked him in the eye and said no. Kings aren't used to hearing no, and sometimes that's the most seductive thing you can say. But beauty isn't enough. Political marriages aren't enough. Elizabeth needs to secure her position, and she does it the medieval way, through marriage. Specifically, through marrying off every single one of her siblings. This is strategy. Pure calculation. Medieval politics is a blood sport. Power flows through connections, through marriages, through control of land and wealth. Elizabeth understands this better than most, better than almost any woman of her era. So she starts placing her family like chess pieces across the board. Her sister Margaret marries the Earl of Arundel, one of the wealthiest men in the kingdom. Massive estates, political influence. Suddenly the Woodvilles have a connection to one of England's great noble houses. Her sister Catherine marries Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham. She's 8 years old, he's 11, both children, standing in front of a priest, making vows they can't comprehend. This isn't a marriage in any meaningful sense. It's a legal contract, a treaty. The children are just living signatures. Her sister Anne marries the heir of the Duke of Exeter. Her brother John marries the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. This one causes problems. The Duchess is in her 60s. John is 19 or 20. The age gap is 45 to 50 years. William Worcester, a chronicler, calls it maritagium diabolicum, a diabolical marriage. People mock John, call him a gold digger, joke that he married his grandmother, make crude comments about what happens in their bedchamber, or more likely doesn't happen. But John doesn't care. Neither does Elizabeth. The Duchess has estates, money, connections, and importantly, she's old. John can wait a few years, inherit everything, become even wealthier. It's cold, it's calculated, but this is how you build power in the 1500s. The Duchess, by the way, survives John by 14 years, needs medications from the king's apothecary. The bills go unpaid and end up litigated in court. Even royal widows fight over pharmacy bills. Medieval life wasn't glamorous, it was petty and bureaucratic and full of unpaid invoices. Mary Woodville marries William Herbert in September of 1466. She's 10, he's 15. Jacquetta Woodville, Elizabeth's sister, another sister with the same name as their mother, because medieval naming conventions were confusing, is married at age 5, March 27th, 1450, to John Lestrange. He's also about 5. They're children, actual children, Playing with toys one day, married the next. The ceremony probably took longer than their attention spans. Imagine standing there, 5 years old, in uncomfortable formal clothes, repeating words you don't understand, looking at another child you've never met, being told this person is now your spouse. It's grotesque when you think about it. But this is medieval England. This is normal. This is how you secure alliances, how you build dynasties, how you make sure your family stays powerful. You marry off your children before they're old enough to have opinions about it. And you do it young because childhood mortality rates are high. If you wait until they're teenagers, one of them might die before the marriage happens. Might catch plague or fever or any of the 100 diseases that kill medieval children. Better to lock in the alliance early, make sure the contracts are signed and sealed before death interferes. This is the Woodville strategy: marriage, connection, building a network so dense, so interwoven with England's nobility that removing them becomes impossible. That attacking the Woodvilles means attacking half the noble families in England. It's brilliant, it's ruthless, and the old nobility hates it because these are upstarts, commoners dressed in noble clothing, a knight's family pretending they belong in the highest circles. The Earl of Arundel, the Duke of Buckingham, the Duke of Exeter, all of them are now connected to the Woodvilles. All of them have Woodville blood mixing with their ancient lineages, and they resent it deeply. They call the marriages diabolical, unnatural, evidence of witchcraft. Because how else could a mere knight's family marry into such high ranks? How else could Elizabeth convince these great nobles to accept Woodville matches? Must be magic, must be spells, must be sorcery, but it's not magic, it's just political genius. And the Earl of Warwick, watching all of this happen, watching the Woodvilles take power he thinks should belong to him, is getting angrier, more resentful, more dangerous. And in 1469, that anger explodes. But before we get to Warwick's rebellion, before we talk about what happens when powerful men decide they've had enough of powerful women, let's talk about something that happened in June of 1467. Something that shows exactly what kind of family the Woodvilles really were. A tournament at Smithfield in London. And Elizabeth's brother Anthony is about to fight the Bastard of Burgundy in a combat that will become legendary. June 11th, 1467. Smithfield in London. Thousands of people packed into the tournament grounds. Nobles, merchants, common folk, everyone who could squeeze in or afford a spot. Because this isn't just any tournament. This is Anthony Woodville, Lord Scales, Elizabeth's brother, against Antoine, the Bastard of Burgundy. And everybody knows this is about more than sport. This is politics. This is reputation. This is England versus Burgundy. Woodville versus everyone who thinks the Woodvilles don't belong. And it's being fought with real weapons in real armour with real danger of death. The Bastard of Burgundy is famous. A warrior, renowned across Europe for his skill in combat. He's the illegitimate son of Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy. Raised in court, trained by the best, proven in actual war. He's not playing games. He's here to show that Burgundy produces better fighters than England. That the Woodvilles, for all their political manoeuvring, can't match true nobility in actual combat. Anthony Woodville is Elizabeth's brother, the one who'll later be executed by Richard III, the one who spent years governing Wales with Edward, Prince of Wales. But right now, he's just the Queen's brother, an upstart, someone people resent, someone they think got his position through his sister's marriage rather than through merit. This tournament is his chance to prove otherwise, to show that Woodville's skill isn't just political, it's physical, it's real, it's dangerous, the combat is brutal. These aren't the Hollywood tournaments you see in movies where knights gently tap each other with lances and everyone stays safe. This is medieval tournament combat. Real armour, real weapons, real potential for serious injury or death. They fight on horseback first, charging at each other with lances. The impact when lance meets shield sounds like thunder, like a small explosion. The horses are trained for this, bred for size and strength, but they're still terrified, still want to bolt. The knights have to control their mounts, while simultaneously aiming a 12-foot wooden spear at a moving target while wearing 60 pounds of steel and hoping they don't get knocked off their horse and trampled. Anthony and the bastard charge, again and again. Lances splintering, shields cracking, the crowd roaring. This goes on for hours, both men proving their skill, both refusing to yield, neither gaining clear advantage. And then they switch to ground combat. Dismount, grab their poleaxes. Now, poleaxes aren't axes like you're thinking. They're not for chopping wood. They're sophisticated weapons, 6 feet long, steel head with multiple striking surfaces, an axe blade on one side for cutting, a hammerhead on the other side for crushing armour, a spike on top for thrusting, and all of it designed to punch through plate armour and kill the man inside. Fighting in full armour with poleaxes is exhausting. You're wearing 60 to 80 pounds of steel. It's hot, you can't see well, through the visor. Your movements are restricted. Every swing of the poleaxe takes enormous effort. Your muscles burn, your lungs scream for air, and you have to keep going because stopping means dying. Anthony and the bastards circle each other, looking for openings, testing defences. The poleaxes swing, metal crashes against metal, sparks fly when steel hits steel at the right angle. The sound echoes across Smithfield. The crowd is screaming, placing bets, watching two men try to kill each other for entertainment. The bastard is good, really good. He's done this before, fought in tournaments across Europe, won most of them. He knows how to read his opponent, how to feint, how to make you think he's going one direction and then strike from another. He's trying to find a weak point in Anthony's armour, a gap, a place where the plates don't quite meet, a spot where he can drive the spike home and end this. But Anthony is matching him, blow for blow, neither gaining clear advantage. And then Anthony does something brilliant. He changes his grip, shifts his weight, and swings the poleaxe at the bastard's visor, the face protection. Metal screeches. The axe blade catches the visor and shears through it. Not completely. Not enough to take the whole thing off, but enough to slice through the metal, to expose flesh underneath, to draw blood. The bastard staggers back, blood running down his face, into his eyes. He can't see properly now, can't tell where the next blow is coming from. He's fighting blind, fighting injured, fighting scared, and Anthony doesn't stop. This is combat. This is war dressed up as sport. You don't stop because your opponent is hurt. You stop when they yield, when they give up, when the king commands it, or when they're dead. Anthony strikes again, aiming for the shoulder now, for the pauldron, the shoulder plate that protects one of the few weak spots in full armour. Where the arm joins the body, where major blood vessels run close to the surface. His axe hits the third pauldron, the back shoulder plate, and tears it completely off, rips it from the bastard's armour, exposes the chainmail underneath, maybe some of the bastard's actual body. The crowd goes insane. This is what they came for. Real violence, real danger, real possibility of death happening right in front of them. The bastard is in genuine danger now. His face is exposed and bleeding. His shoulder is unprotected. He's exhausted from the weight of the armour and the heat and the fighting. He's injured. He's vulnerable. And Anthony is still coming, still swinging, still trying to end this, to win decisively, to prove beyond any doubt that the Woodvilles are fighters, are warriors, are not just political opportunists who got lucky. And that's when Edward IV makes his decision, shouts from the royal box, "Whoo!" the medieval signal to stop fighting, immediately, right now, before someone dies. Guards rush onto the field, have to physically grab both men, pull them apart, because Anthony is still trying to strike, still in combat mode, and the bastard is still trying to defend himself. Both men so deep in the fight that they can't hear the command, can't process that it's over. They're dragged away from each other, held by guards, disarmed, and slowly, gradually, they come back to themselves. Remember where they are. Remember this is a tournament, not a battlefield. Remember they're supposed to stop when the king says stop. Anthony removes his helmet. He's drenched in sweat, breathing hard, but he's smiling. Because he knows he won. Knows he proved what needed to be proved. That the Woodvilles aren't just the Queen's family riding her coattails. They're skilled. They're dangerous. They can fight. The crowd is on its feet, cheering, screaming, throwing flowers and scarves and whatever else they have to show their approval. This was entertainment. This was spectacle. This was worth the price of admission. And Anthony Woodville is declared the victor, the champion, the man who defeated Burgundy's best fighter, who proved that England still has warriors, that the Woodvilles aren't just politicians, they're fighters too. But wait, here's what makes this story even better. After the tournament ends, after the celebration dies down, after everyone goes home, Antoine the Bastard of Burgundy and Anthony Woodville become friends. Genuine friends. They correspond, exchange gifts, visit each other, respect each other, because that's how medieval combat worked. You could try to kill someone in the morning and drink with them in the evening. Combat was business. Personal relationships were something else. You could respect a man's skill while trying to cave in his skull with a hammer. Chivalry was complicated like that. And years later, when Anthony is imprisoned by Richard III, when he's awaiting execution, when he knows he's going to die, he writes, composes poetry, reflects on his life. And one of the things he writes about is that tournament, that fight, that moment when he proved himself against one of Europe's best warriors. It matters to him, even at the end, even when nothing else matters. He remembers fighting the Bastard of Burgundy and winning. That tournament did what Elizabeth needed it to do. It proved the Woodvilles weren't just social climbers. They had valour. They had skill. They could fight. And for a while, for a brief while, it made the accusations quieter, made the whispers less certain, made people think twice before dismissing the Woodvilles as upstarts who didn't deserve their position. But tournaments don't win wars, and tournaments don't stop rebellions. And in 1469, all the tournament victories in the world won't save the Woodvilles from what's coming, because Warwick has had enough, and he's about to do something that will change everything, something Elizabeth will never, ever forgive. August 12th, 1469. While Edward IV sits imprisoned by Warwick, unable to stop anything, unable to protect anyone, unable to give orders that matter, two men are executed, publicly, without trial, without even the pretense of justice. Richard Woodville, Elizabeth's father, the man who caught a duchess's eye and married for love instead of politics, who was fined £1,000 for daring to rise above his station, who spent his entire life fighting to prove he belonged in the world he'd married into, and John Woodville, Elizabeth's brother, the one who'd married the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, the one everyone mocked for marrying a woman in her 60s when he was barely 20. They're not executed together, they're executed separately, in different places, to make sure the message spreads, to make sure everyone in England hears about it. Richard is beheaded at Kenilworth, John at Gosford Green near Coventry. Both men die the same way, kneeling, blindfolded, a sword coming down on the back of their necks, severing their heads from their bodies in one stroke if the executioner is skilled, 2 or 3 if he's not. There's no formal trial, no presentation of evidence, no opportunity to defend themselves. Warwick just declares them traitors, says they've been plotting against the realm, against the rightful order, against everything England stands for. And that's enough. In 1469, when Warwick controls the king, when he has the power, accusations don't need proof. They just need to be spoken. Picture being Elizabeth when she hears this news, when messengers arrive at court, when they tell her that her father is dead. Her brother is dead, murdered by Warwick's order while Edward sat imprisoned and couldn't help, couldn't save them. couldn't even try. The rage must have been overwhelming, the kind of rage that makes you want to scream until your throat tears, until you can't make sound anymore, until the pain inside has somewhere to go. But Elizabeth can't scream, can't rage publicly, can't show that kind of emotion, because queens don't do that. Queens maintain composure, keep control, show strength even when they're breaking inside. So she does what she has to do. She holds it together, accepts condolences with grace, thanks people for their sympathy with a voice that doesn't shake, and starts planning, starts thinking about revenge, starts figuring out how to make Warwick pay for what he's done. And her mother, Jacquetta, widowed, again, at 50-something years old. She's already buried one husband, the Duke of Bedford, and now Richard, the knight she chose, the man she gave up wealth and status to marry, the man she paid £1,000 fine to keep, dead, beheaded by Warwick's order like he was nothing, like their decades together meant nothing, like love was just another casualty of medieval politics. Jacquetta doesn't get to grieve publicly either, can't show weakness, can't give Warwick the satisfaction. She has to be strong for Elizabeth, for her other children, for the family. That's under attack, but imagine the private grief, the rage, the knowledge that her husband died because her daughter married a king, because the Woodvilles rose too high, because they threatened men who thought power was their birthright. Warwick's rebellion collapses, eventually. Edward escapes imprisonment, Warwick flees to France, and Edward is back on the throne. But the damage is done. The Woodvilles have learned something crucial, something that will shape every decision they make going forward. They're never safe, no matter how powerful, no matter how many alliances, no matter how many marriages. There will always be men, like Warwick, who resent their rise, who see them as threats, who will kill them if given the chance. So they have to make sure they're never given that chance again. Have to build power so carefully, so thoroughly, that the next time someone tries to destroy them, they'll fail. But first, Elizabeth has to survive, again, because Warwick isn't done, not even close, and in 1470 everything falls apart again. October 1st, 1470, Elizabeth is pregnant, very pregnant, and she's running through the streets of London in the dark, trying to reach Westminster Abbey before Warwick's men find her. Because Warwick has done the impossible. He's switched sides, joined the Lancastrians, the people he spent years fighting, and he's invaded England with an army, and he's won. Edward IV, who defeated him before, who reclaimed his throne, has been forced to flee the country, across the Channel to Burgundy, with a handful of loyal followers, leaving Elizabeth behind. She escapes from the Tower of London on the night of October 1st. It's dark, the kind of darkness that's absolute in medieval cities where there are no streetlights, no electric glow, just torches casting pools of flickering yellow light that barely push back the black, and between those pools, pure darkness where anything could be hiding. Elizabeth moves through London streets trying to stay invisible, dressed simply. No jewellery catching torchlight, no elaborate gowns rustling loud enough to draw attention. Nothing that screams queen, just rough wool that scratches her skin. A cloak with a hood that smells like whoever owned it last. Clothes that make her anonymous. Clothes that might save her life. And she can smell the city. God, can she smell it? Medieval London at night is a symphony of stench. Human waste in the streets dumped from chamber pots. Rotting food in gutters. Smoke from cooking fires. The sour smell of ale from taverns. The metallic tang of blood from butchers' shops. Animal dung everywhere because horses and cows and pigs share the streets with people. All of it mixing into something that makes your eyes water and your stomach clench. But what Elizabeth smells most is her own fear, that acid smell of terror sweat. Different from normal sweat, sharper, more animal, the smell that tells you something's wrong, that you're prey, that you're running for your life. She's pregnant, her body is heavy, awkward, Moving is hard even when you're not terrified. Her back aches, her feet are swollen, every step is an effort, but she keeps moving, has to keep moving, because stopping means dying. And here's what nobody tells you about that night, what makes it even more terrifying. Elizabeth isn't just running from Warwick, she's running from London itself, because the city is full of people who'd be happy to turn her in, people who'd sell a former queen for a few coins, people who resent the Woodvilles, who blame them for everything wrong in England, who'd love to see Elizabeth dragged through the streets, humiliated, destroyed. So every sound makes her jump. Every shadow could be an enemy. Every torchlit window could be someone looking out, someone recognizing her despite the disguise, someone deciding that betraying the Queen is worth the reward. She reaches Westminster Abbey, pounds on the heavy wooden doors. The sound echoes through the night. Too loud, way too loud. Anyone nearby will hear, will wonder who's seeking sanctuary at this hour, will come to investigate. She pounds again, harder, more desperate. And finally, the door opens. Sanctuary, the medieval legal protection that says if you make it to a church, no one can legally drag you out. It's supposed to keep you safe. But safe is a relative term when you're a pregnant former queen whose enemies control the kingdom and whose husband just fled the country. Elizabeth enters Westminster Abbey for the first time as a refugee. Not as a queen, not with ceremony and honour, as someone running for her life. She's given the abbot's house, a small residence within the abbey grounds, stone walls, small windows, very little light. It's cold, damp, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. And Elizabeth is pregnant, maybe 8 months along, her body heavy, uncomfortable, moving is difficult, sleeping is nearly impossible. And she's stressed. Absolutely stressed beyond belief. Because stress during pregnancy is dangerous, can cause complications, can trigger early labour, can harm the baby, and that's exactly what happens. 3 days after Elizabeth enters sanctuary, officials arrive, Lady Scrope. Attendants, sent by Warwick and Henry VI, who's been restored to the throne, coming to assist with the birth, coming to make sure the former queen doesn't die in childbirth, because that would look bad, would turn people against Warwick, would make him look like a murderer instead of a politician. So they provide help, minimal help, the kind of help that keeps Elizabeth alive but doesn't make her comfortable. That ensures she survives but doesn't thrive. Because Warwick doesn't want her to die, but he doesn't want her to have any power either. He wants her trapped, dependent, helpless, sitting in sanctuary with her children while he rules England, while he restores the Lancastrian line, while he undoes everything Edward accomplished. And the food situation tells you everything you need to know about how minimal this support really is. Half a beef and 2 muttons per week. That's what Warwick provides. Half a cow and 2 sheep. For Elizabeth, her mother Jacquetta, her 3 daughters, and whoever's attending them. That's not generous, that's barely adequate. That's the minimum required to keep them from starving while still showing that Warwick is being merciful, is being kind, is not a monster who lets former queens die in sanctuary. But then John Gould steps in, a London butcher, nobody special, nobody with political power or court connections. Just a tradesman, someone who sells meat for a living, and he hears about the Queen in sanctuary, hears she's not getting enough food, that the rations Warwick provides aren't sufficient for a pregnant woman and her family, and he decides to help. Donates extra meat, half a cow and 2 sheep weekly, out of his own pocket, out of his own inventory. Meat he could sell, meat that represents his livelihood, his profit, his family's security. Why does he do this? Maybe loyalty to Edward, maybe pity for Elizabeth, maybe just basic human decency. Seeing a pregnant woman and her children struggling and deciding to help because it's right. Whatever his reasons, John Gould's actions tell us something important. Even in 1470, even when Warwick controls London, even when helping the Yorkist Queen could get you arrested, or worse, there are still people who remember loyalty, who remember kindness, who help because it's right. And on November 2nd, 1470, All Souls' Day, Elizabeth gives birth, in the abbot's house, in sanctuary, while her enemies rule the kingdom, while her husband is in exile, while everything she built is collapsing around her. She gives birth to a son, Prince Edward, the future Edward V, if there is a future, if any of this matters, if they survive. Thomas More, writing decades later, describes it as having no more ceremony than if he had been a poor man's son. And he's not exaggerating. This should be a royal birth, should have physicians and nobles and celebration, should have announcements and congratulations and recognition that the heir to the Yorkist throne has been born. Instead, it's just a woman in labour, some midwives, a few attendants, cold stone walls, and uncertainty. Massive, crushing uncertainty about whether this child will ever be anything more than the prince who was born in sanctuary. The godparents tell you everything about how diminished Elizabeth's position has become. Abbot Thomas Milling, Prior John Eastney, Lady Scrope, that's it. Church officials and one noblewoman. No dukes, no earls, no powerful nobles showing their support, because supporting the Yorkist heir while Warwick rules is dangerous, is stupid, is asking for trouble. So they stay away, send regrets, make excuses, and Elizabeth sits in sanctuary with her newborn son and wonders if he'll ever sit on a throne, or if he'll just be a footnote, a prince who was born during a rebellion and died forgotten. She doesn't know that Edward is already planning his return, is already gathering forces in Burgundy, is already preparing to invade, is already making deals with Charles the Bold, borrowing money and men, building an army, getting ready to reclaim his throne. Elizabeth doesn't know any of this, can't know any of this, has no way to receive messages, no way to send them, just has to sit there, day after day, week after week, month after month, waiting, hoping, praying, holding her newborn son and trying not to think about what happens if Edward doesn't come back, if he's captured, if he's killed, if this is just how life is now, forever. November, December, January, February, into March, 4 months of sitting in sanctuary, 4 months of cold stone walls and inadequate food and crushing uncertainty, 4 months of holding her son and wondering if she made a mistake, if she should have negotiated with Warwick instead of running, if she should have stayed and tried to work within his regime, if sanctuary was really the best choice or just the desperate choice, the only choice she could see in the moment when everything was collapsing. And then finally, news starts filtering in. Rumours at first, whispers, fragmentary reports that might be true or might be lies or might be wishful thinking. Edward has landed. Edward is gathering support. Edward is marching on London. People are joining him. Maybe. Possibly. Or maybe it's all propaganda. Maybe it's Warwick's people spreading false hope to draw out Edward's supporters so they can be identified and arrested. Elizabeth doesn't know what to believe. Can't know. Just has to wait and hope and keep her children quiet, keep them safe, keep them hidden in sanctuary until she knows for certain what's happening, until she knows if her husband is coming back or if he's already dead and she just hasn't heard yet. And then finally, in April of 1471, it becomes clear. Edward is back. Edward has won. Warwick is dead, killed at the Battle of Barnet on April 14th, killed in the fighting, cut down in the fog, his body displayed in London to prove he's really dead this time. The Kingmaker, dead at 42, and Henry VI, dead too. May 21st, died in the Tower. Officially natural causes. Officially just died of stress and age and a weak constitution. Unofficially, murdered. Almost certainly murdered. On Edward's orders, possibly by Edward's hand. Nobody really investigates. Nobody asks uncomfortable questions. Henry is just dead. And his death means the Lancastrian cause is dead too. No more legitimate Lancastrian king to rally around. No more alternative. Edward is king. Again. Permanently, this time. Elizabeth emerges from sanctuary in May, 6 months after entering. 6 months of cold stone walls and fear and uncertainty. She returns to court, returns to being queen, returns to her position, but she's changed, hardened, more careful, more determined. She's lost her father, lost her brother, been forced into sanctuary twice, given birth without ceremony, spent months not knowing if her husband was alive. And now she's back, and for the next 12 years she's going to make absolutely certain this never happens again, that her family is never this vulnerable again, that when the next crisis comes, she's ready. Because Elizabeth knows something now, knows it in her bones, knows it from experience instead of theory. Power isn't permanent, safety isn't guaranteed. Everything you build can be destroyed in weeks, in days, and the only protection is to make yourself too dangerous to destroy, too powerful to challenge, too embedded in the system to remove without bringing down the whole structure. That's what she's going to do for the next 12 years. Build that kind of power, create that kind of protection, make sure that when Edward dies, when the succession becomes vulnerable, she's ready. Her sons are ready, the Woodvilles are ready, and nobody can do to them what Warwick did. Nobody can execute her family and get away with it. Nobody can drive her into sanctuary and leave her there to suffer. Not again. Never again. But here's what Elizabeth doesn't know yet, what she can't see coming even with all her strategic planning and careful positioning and ruthless accumulation of power. In 12 years, Edward will be dead. Her sons will be in the Tower, Richard will be king, and everything she's building right now, all this careful architecture of power and protection, will collapse in weeks. Just like it did with Warwick, only this time it'll be worse. This time, it won't be imprisonment and sanctuary. This time, it'll be disappearances and murders and secrets that stay buried for 500 years. But that's future Elizabeth's problem. Present Elizabeth has children to raise, a family to advance, a network to build, and 12 years before everything falls apart again. Between 1466 and 1480, Elizabeth gives birth to 10 children, 10 pregnancies. 10 times her body is used as a political tool, as a vessel for heirs. Mary, born August of 1467. Cecily, March of 1469. Edward, the Prince, born in sanctuary in 1470. Margaret, April of 1472. Richard, August of 1473. Another son, another heir, another piece of security for the succession. Anne, November of 1475. George, probably March of 1477. Died young, maybe in 1479. Not much is known about him because he didn't survive long enough to matter politically. Catherine, August of 1479. Bridget, November of 1480. The last child. Born when Elizabeth is in her early 40s, which is ancient for childbearing in the medieval world. 7 of the 10 survive infancy, which is actually good odds for the 1400s. Good enough that Elizabeth has multiple sons and multiple daughters, multiple pieces on the political chessboard, multiple opportunities for marriages and alliances. In 1480, something interesting happens. Mary and Cecily, the older daughters, aged 12 and 11, are created ladies of the Order of the Garter. This is huge. The Order of the Garter is the highest order of chivalry in England. Founded by Edward III, exclusive, prestigious, usually reserved for men, for knights, for warriors. But Edward IV creates his daughters as ladies, gives them this honour, this recognition. It's symbolic. It's saying these girls matter. These girls have value. These girls are worth honouring. And it's also strategic, because every noble in England sees this, sees that Edward values his daughters, that marrying one of them would be advantageous. That alliance with the Yorkist throne might come through these girls. It's advertising, political advertising dressed up as chivalric honour. Mary, the oldest daughter after Elizabeth of York, is being negotiated for marriage to Frederick, Duke of Holstein and Schleswig in 1481. He's a German prince, not major, not a huge power, but respectable, useful, a connection to the Holy Roman Empire. The negotiations go well, papers are drawn up, agreements are made, and then Mary dies, 1482. She's 14 years old, just died. Probably illness, maybe plague, maybe typhus or some other fever. Medieval medicine couldn't save her, couldn't even tell you what killed her. Just that she got sick and died. All those negotiations, all that preparation, all those plans for alliance with Germany. Gone, because a 14-year-old girl caught something and died before anyone could save her. This is medieval life. Death isn't rare. It's not tragic in the modern sense. It's just expected. Children die, adults die, queens and princesses die. You mourn, you move on, you arrange marriages for the next daughter. Cecily of York eventually marries, but not who she's supposed to. Not some duke or prince or earl carefully chosen by her parents. She marries Thomas Kyme, a squire, from Lincolnshire. Nobody. And she does it secretly, without royal permission, without asking anyone, just marries the man she wants. This is exactly what her grandmother Jacquetta did, exactly the scandal that started everything. The family pattern repeating, and she pays for it, banished from court, stripped of her possessions, punished for daring to choose, for thinking she had the right to marry for love instead of politics, for forgetting that royal daughters aren't people. They're assets. They're treaties written in female form, and you don't get to waste yourself on some minor squire just because you like him. Anne of York is betrothed to Philip of Austria in 1480. Philip the Fair, future Duke of Burgundy, future King of Spain through marriage. This is a major alliance. This is Edward looking toward Europe, looking at building connections that will last generations. The treaty is signed, the arrangements are made, but the betrothal never goes through, never becomes marriage, because Edward dies in 1483 before it can be formalised. And Richard III isn't interested in honouring Edward's foreign arrangements, isn't interested in Anne marrying Philip. So Anne eventually marries Thomas Howard instead, Earl of Surrey, eventually Duke of Norfolk, a significant English noble, important family, but not the European prince she'd been promised, not the international alliance Edward had planned, just an English marriage, keeping her at home, keeping her useful to the new regime. Catherine of York is betrothed when she's 2 weeks old. 2 weeks. They're negotiating her marriage to Juan, Prince of Asturias, heir to Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, before she can hold her head up, before she can focus her eyes, before she has any idea she exists. That's how early marriage negotiations start for royal children. That's how little choice they have. That's how quickly they become political tools instead of children. That betrothal also falls through. Catherine eventually marries William Courtenay, Earl of Devon, English, not Spanish, not the international alliance that would have connected England to the emerging Spanish Empire. Just another English noble absorbed into Tudor England. Bridget, the youngest, is sent to a convent, becomes a nun, dies in 1517, probably the safest of all Elizabeth's daughters. Locked away from politics, from marriage negotiations, from being used as a treaty, just praying in a convent somewhere while history happens without her. Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter, gets special treatment. She's being prepared to be queen, maybe queen consort if Edward arranges a good marriage, but queen nonetheless. And then there are the sons. Edward, Prince of Wales, born in sanctuary, created Prince of Wales in 1471 at 6 months old, sent to Ludlow Castle in Wales at 3 years old to learn how to govern, given his own household, his own council, his own court, being trained to be king from the moment he could walk. Richard, Duke of York, the younger son, born in 1473, named after his uncle, Richard of Gloucester, who will one day destroy him. married at age 4 to Anne Mowbray, who dies when she's 8, a widower at 6 years old. These are Elizabeth's children, her legacy, her insurance policy, her investment in the future. Every pregnancy was dangerous. Every birth was life-threatening. Medieval childbirth killed women constantly, but Elizabeth survived all 10, and 7 of her children survived infancy. She's done her job, produced heirs, multiple heirs, boys and girls, options and backups and alliances. The succession is secure. The dynasty is established. Edward has sons to inherit, daughters to marry off. Everything is in place. And then, in April of 1483, Edward dies. April 9th, 1483. Edward IV is dead. Suddenly, he's only 40 years old. The cause is probably pneumonia, maybe a stroke, maybe something else. Medieval medicine couldn't really tell you, just that he went from healthy to dead in about a week. 1 week. That's how fast everything changes. 1 week from vigorous king to corpse. And his heir is 12 years old. Prince Edward is at Ludlow with Elizabeth's brother, Anthony Woodville. 200 miles from London. Being raised, being educated, being prepared to be king someday. But not yet, not at 12. 12-year-olds don't rule kingdoms alone. They need regents, councils, adult men to govern until they come of age. Edward IV appoints his brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as Lord Protector, the man who'll govern until young Edward can rule alone. Richard is the logical choice, Edward's brother, loyal throughout the reign, never plotted, never rebelled, governed the north effectively for years, competent, trustworthy, no reason to betray his nephew. But Elizabeth understands the danger immediately. The old nobility hates the Woodvilles, always has. They've been waiting for this moment, waiting for Edward to die, waiting for a chance to destroy the upstart family that rose too high. Elizabeth needs to get her son crowned fast, before anyone can interfere, before the old nobility can reorganize, before Richard can consolidate power. She sends messages to Anthony at Ludlow. Bring Edward to London, now, fast. Get him crowned before anyone can stop you. Anthony begins travelling, not rushing, doing everything properly, travelling with appropriate ceremony. 2,000 men as escort, not an army, just respectable security for a king in waiting. Richard is moving too, riding south from the north, fast, with his own armed force, moving to intercept. April 30th, 1483. They meet at Stony Stratford. Anthony greets Richard. They're family after all. Brothers-in-law. They have dinner together, talk, share wine. Everything seems fine, cordial, friendly. Next morning, May 1st, Richard arrests Anthony Woodville and Richard Grey, Elizabeth's brother and her son from her first marriage, charges them with treason, takes control of the 12-year-old king. When Elizabeth hears this news, she doesn't wait to see what happens next, doesn't try to negotiate, doesn't hope for the best. She grabs her daughters, her younger son, Richard, Duke of York, and runs back to Westminster Abbey, back to sanctuary. Again, and this time, she's not quiet about it. This time, there's no careful, dignified retreat. This is panic. This is terror. This is a woman who knows her family is being hunted and is willing to smash through walls to survive. Thomas More describes it. Her servants breaking down the abbey walls, smashing through stone to get furniture inside before anyone can stop them. Chests, coffers, everything trussed on men's backs, some loading, some going, some breaking down walls to bring things the nearest way. This isn't retreat. This is fortress building. Elizabeth is moving everything she owns into sanctuary. Every piece of wealth, every document, every treasure, because she knows Richard is coming for all of it. And sanctuary law says he can't touch what's inside those walls. Archbishop Thomas Rotherham rushes to Elizabeth that night, delivers the Great Seal of England to her, the seal that validates royal documents, the ultimate symbol of governmental authority. He's giving it to Elizabeth because he thinks she should have it, thinks she might need it, thinks maybe, possibly, she can use it to protect her son. Next day, he takes it back. Within days, he's stripped of the Chancellor's office, punished for even considering that Elizabeth might have legitimate authority. Elizabeth is trapped, her daughters with her, her younger son with her, hiding in the abbot's house, protected by church law, completely cut off from what's happening outside. Richard, controlling young Edward V, prepares for the coronation. June 22nd, less than 2 months away. Except there's a problem. The Duke of York, Elizabeth's younger son, still in sanctuary with his mother, and some people are saying the coronation isn't legitimate without both sons present, that the ceremony needs the heir and the spare. That tradition demands it, so they come for him. Richard sends a delegation, Archbishop Thomas Bourchier, John Howard and his son, 8 boats of soldiers, armed guards forming a chain around the abbey. They demand Elizabeth surrender her son. She refuses. He's safe in sanctuary. Church law protects him. They can't touch him here. They say he's needed for the coronation. It's temporary. He'll be returned afterward, just for the ceremony, just for tradition. Archbishop Bourchier personally promises, swears on his position, on his honour, on everything holy, the boy will be safe, will be returned, will be protected. Dominic Mancini, an Italian chronicler who's in London watching all this, writes that when Elizabeth saw herself besieged, saw the preparations for violence, saw that they were willing to violate sanctuary if necessary, she surrendered her son, trusting the Archbishop's word. Having no choice, she kisses him goodbye, tells him to be brave, watches him walk out with armed guards, never sees him again. Both boys are taken to the Tower of London. For their safety, Richard says, to prepare for the coronation, standard procedure. Kings often stayed in the Tower before coronations. It's a royal residence, not just a prison, except the coronation never happens. June 25th, 1483. Richard declares Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth invalid. Edward had been pre-contracted to Lady Eleanor Butler before marrying Elizabeth. The pre-contract means the marriage was void from the beginning. All the children are bastards, illegitimate, unable to inherit. Therefore Richard, as Edward's brother and closest legitimate male heir, is the rightful king. July 6th, 1483. Richard III is crowned. The princes remain in the Tower, no longer royal, just illegitimate sons of a dead king. And then something happens that England will whisper about for the next 500 years. Something that will haunt Richard's reputation forever. Something that will inspire plays and novels and endless speculation. The boys vanish. Not dramatically, not with announcements or explanations. They just stop existing. People report seeing them at windows in the Tower, playing in the gardens, being escorted by guards. Young Edward still wearing his royal clothes even though he's no longer king. Richard, 9 years old, still clutching toys or books or whatever. A 9-year-old in the 1400s kept close for comfort. And then sightings become less frequent. Once a day instead of several times, once every few days, once a week. Then not at all. The servants who'd attended them are dismissed, reassigned, sent to other positions without explanation. Questions are deflected. The princes are fine. The princes are resting. The princes don't require visitors at this time. But nobody sees them. Not nobles, not foreign ambassadors keeping careful watch, not even the Tower guards, who suddenly claim they haven't seen the boys in weeks, maybe months, they're not sure. Time blurs when you're trying not to notice something. Here's what we think happened, what the evidence suggests, what makes the most sense given medieval politics and Richard's desperate need to secure his stolen throne. Sometime between July and September of 1483, someone enters the prince's chambers in the Tower. Late at night, when it's dark, when there are fewer witnesses, the boys are asleep, or maybe they're awake, Maybe they hear footsteps. Maybe young Edward sits up, asks who's there. Maybe he thinks it's a servant bringing food or drink or messages from their mother. It's not. What happens next is speculation, educated guessing based on fragments of evidence and witness accounts given years later when it was finally safe to talk. Some say they were smothered, pillows held over their faces while they struggled, while they kicked and tried to scream, while their small bodies fought against men stronger than them, fought until they couldn't fight anymore, until they went still, until they stopped breathing. Some say they were strangled, hands around young throats, squeezing until windpipes collapsed, until faces turned purple, until eyes bulged and tongues protruded and life left them in minutes that must have felt like hours. Some say poison, something in their food, something that made them sick, made them convulse, made them bleed from their mouths and noses while they died in agony, wondering why nobody would help them. We don't know. We'll never know. For certain. Because the bodies were hidden, buried somewhere in the tower, or dumped in the Thames, or burned, or buried in unconsecrated ground like criminals, like children who didn't deserve proper Christian burial because admitting they deserved burial would mean admitting they'd been murdered. In 1674, workmen are renovating the tower, making repairs, moving stones, building new structures, and they find something. A wooden box, about 3 feet long, hidden under a staircase, buried deep beneath the foundation stones. Inside, 2 small skeletons, children, one slightly larger than the other, both with obvious signs of violence. The smaller skull shows evidence of trauma. The bones show they died young, very young, maybe 10 and 12, maybe 9 and 13. The ages roughly match Edward and Richard. The bones are removed, examined briefly, then placed in an urn designed by Christopher Wren, sealed, and interred in Westminster Abbey. A small monument is erected, nothing elaborate, nothing that draws too much attention. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something terrible happened here. In 1933, the urn is opened. Medical experts examine the bones using techniques available at the time. They determine the bones are likely the prince's. The ages roughly match. The circumstances of discovery match contemporary accounts of where the bodies might have been hidden. But the science isn't definitive. Can't be definitive. The bones are too old, too degraded, and in 1933, DNA testing doesn't exist yet. Multiple times since then, historians and forensic experts have requested permission to re-examine the bones, use modern DNA testing, compare them to known relatives, definitively answer the question of whether these are really the prince's. Every time, the request is denied. The Church of England refuses, says the bones must remain undisturbed, that it would be disrespectful, that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and so the princes remain in their urn, their identity uncertain, their deaths unconfirmed, their story unfinished. Elizabeth, in Sanctuary, doesn't know any of this, can't know, has no information, no messages, no way to find out if her sons are alive or dead, or suffering or calling for her. She just has to sit there, in those cold stone rooms, day after day, wondering, hoping, praying, torturing herself with possibilities. Maybe they're fine. Maybe Richard is keeping them comfortable. Maybe they'll be released once things settle down, once Richard feels secure, once the political situation stabilises. Or maybe they're already dead. Maybe they died weeks ago. Maybe they're buried somewhere and she'll never know where. Never be able to mourn properly. Never be able to give them proper Christian burial. Never be able to say goodbye. The not knowing is its own torture. Worse than knowing in some ways, because she can't process it, can't accept it, can't move forward, just has to sit in this limbo, wondering if her children are alive or dead or somewhere in between. Her brothers are dead. Anthony Woodville, executed at Pontefract on June 25th. Richard Grey, Her son from her first marriage, executed the same day, without trial, without charges that made sense, just killed because Richard wanted them gone, wanted the Woodvilles destroyed, wanted no opposition. Elizabeth has lost her husband, lost her sons, lost her brothers, lost her crown, lost everything she spent 20 years building, and she can't fight, can't rage, can't do anything except sit in sanctuary and survive. But surviving isn't enough. Not for Elizabeth. She needs a plan, needs a way forward, needs to ensure that even if she's lost everything, even if her sons are dead, even if the Woodvilles are destroyed, she can still salvage something. And that's when she starts plotting with Margaret Beaufort, Henry Tudor's mother, a woman as strategic and ruthless as Elizabeth herself, a woman who spent years planning to put her son on the English throne, a woman who sees opportunity in Richard's coup, who understands that murdering children, even bastardized princes, turns people against you, makes you vulnerable. They make a deal, in secret, through intermediaries, through messages smuggled in and out of sanctuary. If Henry Tudor invades England and defeats Richard, he'll marry Elizabeth of York, Elizabeth's eldest daughter, the Yorkist princess, the girl who would have been heir if Edward's marriage had been recognised. If her brothers hadn't disappeared, the marriage will unite Lancaster and York. Red Rose and White Rose, end the Wars of the Roses, create a new dynasty, give legitimacy to Henry's shaky claim by linking him to the Yorkist bloodline. And for Elizabeth, it's the only way to salvage anything. Her sons are probably dead, she can't change that, but her daughter can be queen. The Woodville bloodline can continue. The family can survive. It's cold, it's calculated, it's making a deal with a man whose only claim to the throne is through an illegitimate line and sheer ambition. But it's all Elizabeth has left. August 22nd, 1485. Bosworth Field. Richard III has the larger army. More men, more experience. The advantage of being the crowned king. Henry Tudor has a smaller force, mostly French mercenaries and Welsh supporters. Men who are here because they're paid, or because they hate Richard, or because they're betting on the future rather than the present. The battle begins. Chaos, medieval warfare at its finest. Thousands of men smashing into each other with swords and axes and polearms. The noise is deafening, the smell overwhelming, blood and sweat, and fear and death. Richard is fighting, not commanding from a distance, actually fighting, in the thick of it. And then he sees Henry, across the battlefield, guarded by a small group of men. Richard makes a decision, a fatal decision. He's going to charge, going to kill Henry, personally, end this rebellion with one stroke. It's brave or it's stupid or it's both. He spurs his horse, charges straight at Henry, his crown still on his head. The actual crown. He's wearing it into battle because he's the king, and he wants everyone to know it. He crashes into Henry's guards. His sword is swinging, cutting. He's trying to reach Henry, trying to end this. For a moment, it looks like he might actually do it, might actually win through sheer courage and desperation. But Henry's men close in, too many of them. They surround Richard, pull him from his horse. He's still fighting, still trying, but there are too many. They cut him down, swords and axes. His skull is split, his body hacked. He dies in the mud. The last Plantagenet king, dead at 32. His crown is found in a thorn bush, literally. Someone picks it up, carries it to Henry, places it on his head. And just like that, Henry Tudor becomes Henry VII, King of England. Richard's body doesn't get royal treatment, doesn't get ceremony or dignity. They strip off his armour, strip off his clothes, throw his naked corpse over a horse, his head hanging down, blood dripping, and they parade him through Leicester, through the streets where people line up to see, to mock, to throw things at the dead king, at the man who'd stolen the throne and murdered children and got exactly what he deserved. Elizabeth is still in sanctuary when this happens, still sitting in those cold stone rooms. But news filters in. Richard is dead. Henry won. The deal stands. Her daughter will be queen. Elizabeth emerges from sanctuary. Again, for the second time. She returns to something like freedom, something like power. But it's not the same. She's not queen anymore. She's just the former queen, the king's mother-in-law. Henry's living reminder of the family he's trying to absorb and neutralise. January 18th, 1486. Henry VII marries Elizabeth of York, Elizabeth Woodville's daughter. The wedding everyone's been waiting for. The marriage that's supposed to unite the houses. Red rose and white rose joining together. Peace at last. Elizabeth of York becomes queen. Elizabeth Woodville becomes the queen mother. Should be a position of honour, of influence, of respect. But Henry doesn't trust her. Why would he? She's a woman who clawed her way to power once before, who survived rebellions and sanctuary and accusations of witchcraft, who made deals with his mother to put him on the throne. That kind of woman doesn't just retire quietly, so he keeps her close, but not too close, gives her some money, some position, but watches her, always watches her. And in 1487, he strips her of everything, all her lands, all her titles, all her income, everything she has left, gone. The official reason? She made peace with Richard III. She left sanctuary and accepted his protection. She allowed her daughters to attend Richard's court. Therefore, she's disloyal, untrustworthy, complicit in Richard's reign. It's absurd. She was trapped in sanctuary with no food, no allies, and 5 daughters to protect. What was she supposed to do? Starve to death on principle? But Henry needs a reason, and that's good enough. The real reason? Elizabeth Woodville is too dangerous to leave with resources, too smart, too connected, too capable of causing problems. So he takes everything, leaves her with nothing. And in 1487, Elizabeth Woodville is forced into a convent, Bermondsey Abbey, on the south bank of the Thames, a cold, damp place where noble women go to disappear. Officially, it said she'd chosen a quiet religious life, that she wants to spend her remaining years in prayer and contemplation, that she's tired of politics, tired of court life, wants peace. Let's be real. She was exiled, silenced, removed from power. Picture being her. You've survived war, accusations, exile, the disappearance of your sons, and you've finally seen your daughter become queen. Your bloodline secured, your family vindicated, and your reward? A convent cell, a rough wool habit, endless prayers, and the knowledge that even in victory, even with your daughter on the throne, you're still too dangerous to be allowed near power. Elizabeth lives in that convent for 5 years. She's not allowed visitors without permission, not allowed to leave, not allowed to participate in court life or see her grandchildren regularly or advise her daughter. She dies there on June 8th, 1492. She's around 55 years old. There's no grand funeral, no state ceremony, no elaborate tomb in Westminster Abbey next to Edward IV, her husband. She's buried at night at Windsor on June 10th, around 11 o'clock. A wooden coffin, the kind they use for common people, carried by boat down the Thames. Only a dozen old men show up, holding torches, except they're not even proper torches. They're torch ends, stubs, the garbage you'd use to light your way to the privy. The hearse is such as they use for the common people. 4 wooden candlesticks, nothing royal, nothing that says this woman once wore a crown. This is how Elizabeth Woodville's story ends, buried at midnight like she was nobody. But here's what's fascinating. Here's what tells you everything. Her will, written when she knows she's dying, when she has nothing left. I, Elizabeth, by the grace of God, Queen of England, not former Queen, not widow of Edward IV, not mother of Elizabeth of York, Queen of England, present tense, current title, even at the end. Even with nothing left, even knowing she's about to be buried like a pauper, with old men holding trash for light, she's still claiming that title, still insisting on her identity, still refusing to accept that she's nobody. That's not the voice of a victim. That's not someone who's given up. That's someone who's had everything taken from her and still refuses to be erased. And here's the thing. Here's the part that matters. The part that makes the midnight funeral look stupid in retrospect. Elizabeth's blood flows through the British royal family. Every monarch since Henry VII carries Woodville blood. Elizabeth of York gave birth to Henry VIII. Henry VIII's daughter was Elizabeth I. And the current royal family descends from them. The Woodvilles won. Not the way Elizabeth wanted. Not with glory or recognition or the power she'd once held. But they won. Their bloodline endured. Their legacy survived. And that midnight funeral? That shameful burial with torch stubs and a wooden coffin? It didn't erase her. It didn't make her disappear. It just showed one final time exactly how dangerous she was. Even dead, even buried, even with nothing left. Henry VII was scared of her. So scared he buried her at night, gave her a pauper's funeral, made sure there was no ceremony, no mourners, nothing that could turn her into a martyr, nothing that could remind people she'd been queen. But you can't erase someone by burying them poorly. You can't make them disappear by taking away their torches and giving them garbage instead. You just make them memorable. You just make people ask questions. You just make sure that 500 years later, someone is going to look at the records and say, wait, why did they bury the Queen at midnight with old men holding trash? And then they're going to dig. They're going to research. They're going to uncover all the details, the lead figurines and the witchcraft trials and the secret marriages and the sanctuary and the princes and the deals and the betrayals and all of it. You can't silence someone by treating them badly. You just make their story louder. Elizabeth Woodville was accused of witchcraft, but the only magic she ever used was survival, intelligence, strategy, understanding how power works and refusing to let it destroy her completely. She lost her sons, lost her crown, lost everything, and still identified herself as Queen of England in her will. Still claimed that title, still refused to accept that she was nobody. That's not witchcraft. That's just a woman who refused to disappear, who refused to be erased, who refused to let history forget her, no matter how hard they tried. So tonight, when you go to sleep, remember Elizabeth Woodville. Not as a fairy tale, not as a romance, not as a victim or a villain or a cautionary tale, but as a survivor, a strategist, a woman who played the most dangerous game in medieval England and refused to lose, even when losing was the only option left. Remember that she was buried at midnight in a wooden coffin with torch ends. And remember that we're still talking about her, still asking questions, still refusing to let her story die. That's victory. Not conventional victory, not the victory she wanted, but victory nonetheless. The silence tried to erase her. The midnight burial tried to make her disappear. And here we are, 530 years later, telling her story, remembering her name, refusing to let her be forgotten. Elizabeth Woodville, Queen of England, mother of princes, accused witch, survivor, the woman they tried to bury at midnight with garbage for light, and the woman who refused to stay buried. If you made it this far, thank you. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Tell me in the comments what surprised you most about Elizabeth's story, and let me know where you're watching from and what other historical mysteries you want me to dig into next. Because there are always more stories, more women who were called witches when they were really just powerful, more midnight funerals that tell you everything about what someone was scared of, more silences that scream if you know how to listen. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep refusing to accept the easy answers, and keep remembering that the women they tried hardest to erase are usually the ones worth remembering most. Good night.